Okay, imagine this. You find a $20 bill on the street. Feels pretty good, right?
Yeah, definitely a nice little boost.
But then, maybe an hour later, you get a $20 parking ticket. Now, which feeling is stronger? For most of us, that sting of the loss, the ticket, it hits way harder than the joy of finding the money.
It absolutely does. And that visceral, sort of disproportionate feeling is exactly what we're diving into today. Loss aversion. It's one of the most, powerful psychological phenomena affecting how we make decisions.
That's right. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're unpacking loss aversion, this core idea that, like you said, losses loom larger than gains. You might not even realize how much this bias, nudges your choices every single day.
From big financial stuff all the way down to tiny habits.
So our mission today is to really explore where loss aversion comes from, understand why we seem to be wired this way, see how it pops up in sometimes surprising real-world situations.
And importantly, equip you, our listeners, with some insights to maybe, spot these subtle traps and navigate them a bit better.
Okay, so let's start with that gut punch from the parking ticket. What's the actual framework? How do scientists define this loss aversion?
Right. So at its heart, loss aversion is what we call a cognitive bias. It basically means the disutility, the pain of giving something up or, experiencing something negative.
Like the ticket.
Exactly, like the ticket. That pain is greater than the utility, the pleasure you get from acquiring an equivalent gain, like finding that $20.
Losing $5 just hurts more than gaining $5 feels good.
Precisely. And it's not just a little bit more either.
No. How much more are we talking?
Well, empirically, studies often show that losses feel about twice as impactful psychologically as equivalent gains. It's a pretty significant difference.
Wow, twice as much.
Yeah. Daniel Kahneman, who really pioneered a lot of this work, put it simply, the response to losses is stronger than the response to corresponding gains. It's a fundamental asymmetry.
Okay, so it's a big deal. Where did this idea actually come from? Who figured this out?
Well, the term loss aversion itself was coined back in 1979. It was Daniel Kahneman again, working with his longtime collaborator, Amos Tversky.
Ah, the famous duo.
The very same. It was a core part of their really groundbreaking prospect theory.
Prospect theory. Okay, I've heard of that. It kind of shook up traditional economics, didn't it?
It really did, because traditional economics for a long time assumed people were, perfectly rational, making decisions to maximize their overall wealth or utility in a very logical, calculated way.
A rational agent model.
Exactly. But Kahneman and Tversky came along and said, hang on, that's not actually how people behave. Prospect theory describes decision-making based on potential gains and losses relative to a specific reference point, usually, where you are right now.
Relative to a reference point. That sounds key. It's not about the absolute amount of wealth, but the change.
Precisely. It's all about the change from where you stand. A $100 gain feels different if you start with $10 versus starting with $10 million.
Right. Makes sense. And they have that visual for it, the S-shaped curve. It sounds a bit technical, but I remember seeing it.
Yeah, the S-shaped value function is actually quite intuitive when you break it down. Imagine a graph. Okay. Horizontal axis is gains to the right, losses to the left. Vertical axis is the subjective value, or like the feeling good or bad.
Yeah, got it.
The curve starts at the center, your reference point. Now for gains, as you move right, the curve goes up, but it gets flatter as the gains get bigger.
Flatter, meaning?
Diminishing marginal utility. That first $100 you gain feels amazing. The next $100, maybe after you've already gained $1,000, still good, but not as thrilling. The extra boost of happiness gets smaller.
Ah, okay. The excitement wears off a bit.
Exactly. Now look at the loss side, moving left. The curve goes down, obviously, but it also tends to flatten out for bigger losses. That's diminishing marginal disutility. Losing another $100 after you're already down $1,000 is bad, but maybe not quite as devastating as losing that very first $100 felt.
Okay, so the pain also diminishes at the margins, but what's the crucial part?
The crucial part is the steepness. The curve drops much more steeply for losses, right near that starting reference point, than it rises for gains.
So that initial loss just plunges you down much faster than the equivalent gain lifts you up.
That's it. That's the visual representation of losses loom larger than gains. The slope is steeper on the loss side.
That S shape really captures it. Now, prospect theory also talks about probabilities, right? Because we're not always great at judging odds either, are we?
No, definitely not. That's another key part. People don't weigh probabilities in a purely rational statistical way. We tend to overweight very low probabilities.
Overweight low ones. Like the lottery.
Exactly like the lottery. Or think about buying insurance for, really rare events. We focus on that tiny chance of a huge win or a huge loss, more than the numbers might strictly warrant.
Okay, so we blow up small chances in our minds. What about big chances, like something that's almost certain?
We tend to do the opposite there. We underweight high probabilities. A 99% chance of success somehow feels less certain, less appealing than a guaranteed 100% win. That little 1% of doubt looms large.
Huh. Which leads to things like the insurance paradox you mentioned.
Yeah, exactly. It helps explain why someone might pay quite a bit more in premiums just to lower their deductible, even if the chance of actually making a claim is really, really low.
Because they're overweighting that small chance of having to pay the high deductible.
Right. They're overweighting the small probability of that loss, and the pain associated with it feels significant, even if statistically it might not be the best financial move. It's buying peace of mind against that exaggerated fear of loss.
Okay, so that's the theory, the framework. How does this actually show up? Like in everyday life? Because you said it's everywhere.
Oh, it really is. One of the absolute classic examples is the endowment effect.
Right, I think I know this one. It's like once we own something, we value it more.
That's exactly it. We place a higher value on something just because we own it compared to an identical item we don't own.
Like my favorite coffee mug. I probably wouldn't sell it for what someone else would offer, even if it's just a plain old mug.
Perfect example. There's a famous story about an economist, Richard Peller actually, who loved wine. He bought some Bordeaux years ago. Cheap.
Huh?
The value shot up, like $10 bottles became worth $200 at auction.
Nice investment.
Right. But here's the thing. He wouldn't sell his bottles at that $200 auction price, but he also wouldn't buy any more bottles at that $200 price.
So his selling price was way higher than his buying price for the exact same thing.
Exactly. His willingness to accept losing the wine was much higher than his willingness to pay to get more. Just owning it inflated its value to him.
That's fascinating. And they've tested this in labs.
Oh, yes. The classic is the mugs and chocolate bars study. Give half the group mugs, half chocolate bars, then offer them the chance to trade. What happens?
People stick with what they got.
Overwhelmingly. Even though the items were roughly equal in value, it wasn't about transaction costs or confusion. It was the simple fact of initial ownership. Losing what they had felt worse than gaining the other item felt good.
This sounds very connected to status quo bias.
Yeah.
Is that driven by the same mechanism?
Very much so. Status quo bias, our tendency to just stick with the current situation is often fueled by loss aversion. Think about staying in a job you don't love, or maybe even a relationship that's not great.
Why do we do that?
Because the thought of leaving involves perceived losses, losing security, losing routine, losing the familiar, even if it's not ideal. That potential pain of loss often outweighs the potential uncertain gain of making a change.
The fear of losing what you have, even if it's mediocre.
Precisely.
And then, oh boy, the sunk cost fallacy. I think we're all guilty of this one. Sticking with something just because we've already put so much into it.
Yes. That terrible movie you keep watching because you're already an hour in. Or continuing to pour money into a failing business project.
Or holding on to that losing stock. I can't sell it now. I'm already down so much.
Exactly. It's irrational, right? The past investment is gone. It's sunk. What matters is the future prospect. But we hate realizing the loss, making it official by selling or quitting. So we stick with it, often making things worse, just to avoid confirming that past loss.
It's like admitting defeat feels like a loss in itself.
It does. And knowing all this, you can bet marketers are paying attention.
Oh, I can imagine. How do they use this against us? For us.
Well, they definitely leverage it. Think about all those urgency tactics. Limited time offer, going fast, only 3 left in stock.
The countdown timers on websites.
Yes. All of that creates a fear of missing out, a fear of losing the opportunity or the deal. FOMO is basically loss aversion applied to opportunities. They frame inaction as a potential loss.
That makes so much sense. Is there a specific study on this, like in marketing?
There's a really neat one involving pizza toppings. Researchers gave one group plain pizzas and said, add toppings, each costs extra. They gave another group pizzas loaded with everything and said, remove toppings, you save money for each one.
Okay, what happened?
The second group, the ones starting with a loaded pizza, ended up keeping and therefore paying for significantly more toppings.
Because taking them off felt like a loss.
Exactly. They were reluctant to lose the toppings they were initially endowed with, even if they might not have chosen to add them in the first place.
Wow. That's clever and a bit sneaky. And this must apply to price changes too, like how we react to gas prices.
Definitely. We are way more sensitive to price increases than price decreases. Gas prices shoot up, it's all over the news, people are outraged.
But when they drop back down, it's kind of,
Right. There was a study on egg prices, actually. A 10% price increase caused demand to drop by nearly 8%. But a 10% price decrease only boosted demand by about 3%. The pain of the increase had a much bigger behavioral impact.
So this isn't just about shopping. Does loss aversion creep into bigger things? Politics, conflict.
Oh, absolutely. In politics, how you frame something is crucial. A policy described as achieving 90% employment sounds much better and is generally more popular than the exact same policy described as resulting in 10% unemployment.
Even though it's the same outcome?
Yep. People prefer the gain frame. The loss frame triggers that aversion.
And in really high-stakes situations like international conflict.
It can be really significant there. Leaders or nations who feel they are in a position of loss, maybe they're losing a war or their political power is threatened, they become more likely to take big risks.
Riskier than they normally would.
Yes, sometimes extreme risks, like a long-shot military gamble or implementing really painful reforms. They do it to try and avoid further losses or to recoup what they've already lost, even if the objective odds aren't great. The drive to avoid confirming a loss can lead to doubling down on risky strategies.
That sounds potentially dangerous. What about something more mundane, like, say, education?
There was a fascinating study with teacher incentives. One group was offered a bonus at the end of the year if their students met performance targets, a standard gain frame.
Okay.
Another group was given the bonus money up front at the beginning of the year, but told they'd have to pay it back if their students didn't meet the targets.
Ah, the loss frame. Giving it back would feel like a loss.
Exactly. And guess which group saw significantly better student performance?
The ones who got the money up front.
Yep. The potential pain of losing the money they already felt they possessed was a much stronger motivator than the potential pleasure of gaining a bonus later.
That's powerful. So it seems pretty clear loss aversion is a major force. But is it, like, universally accepted? Are there debates or critiques?
Oh, yeah. Like any major theory, it's been debated and refined. Some research suggests loss aversion might not be quite as strong or universal, especially when the stakes are really small, like pennies.
So losing $1 might trigger it, but losing a cent might not.
Something like that. Or some argue its overall generality might be a bit less than initially proposed. It doesn't necessarily dictate every single choice.
Are there other explanations for some of these effects, like the status quo bias?
There are. David Gall, for instance, proposed something called psychological inertia. The idea is maybe we just prefer not changing, regardless of gain or loss. It's simply easier to do nothing. Change requires effort. So inertia might explain things like status quo bias rather than purely loss aversion.
Okay. Effort avoidance, not just loss avoidance.
Right. And then there's another interesting concept, loss attention.
Loss attention, how's that different?
This idea suggests that losses don't just feel bad, they grab our attention more strongly. They trigger heightened physiological arousal. Heart rate goes up, pupils dilate.
Okay, so does that increased attention help or hurt?
Well, paradoxically, it might actually improve performance on certain tasks because you're more focused. It could even lead someone to choose an option with a small loss if it also has a higher overall expected value, because the loss flags it for closer inspection. So it's not just about emotional pain, but about attentional focus.
That makes sense. Losses are signals, maybe important ones.
Could be. And some critics also point out that while prospect theory works great in lab experiments, maybe traditional economic models of risk aversion are still pretty good approximations for complex, real-world, high-stakes decisions like, say, managing a huge farm or a large investment portfolio where people might be more deliberative.
Right, maybe experience and professionalism can temper the bias somewhat.
Possibly, yeah.
So this is all happening inside our heads. Do we know how the brain actually handles gains versus losses? Is there a neurological basis?
There absolutely is. Brain imaging studies like fMRI have shown pretty clearly that gains and losses activate different, though sometimes overlapping, brain circuits.
Okay, what lights up for gains?
Anticipating gains tends to activate areas associated with reward and pleasure, like parts of the ventral striatum. Think dopamine pathways getting excited.
The brain's reward system. Makes sense. What about losses?
Anticipating losses engages different areas often linked to negative emotion, fear, and anxiety regions like the amygdala and the insula. It's more like the brain's threat detection system kicking in.
So different circuits for pleasure and pain, essentially.
Broadly, yes. And crucially, the brain activity shows that asymmetry we talked about. The deactivation or negative response to increasing losses is significantly steeper, more pronounced than the activation for increasing gains.
So the brain's own electrical and chemical response mirrors that S-shaped curve losses really do register more strongly.
It seems so, yeah. It reinforces the losses loom larger idea right down at the neural level.
Wow, why would we be wired like that? Is there an evolutionary angle?
That's one of the main theories. Think about our ancestors on the savannah. Avoiding a threat, losing your food supply, getting injured, becoming prey was arguably more critical for immediate survival and passing on your genes than finding an extra bit of food or a new opportunity.
A single big loss could be fatal, whereas a single gain might just be a small advantage.
Exactly. As Kahneman put it, organisms that treat threats as more urgent than opportunities have a better chance to survive and reproduce. A bias towards strongly avoiding losses might simply have been adaptive.
That makes a lot of intuitive sense. And this isn't just us humans, right? Didn't you mention monkeys earlier?
Right. There's fascinating cross-species evidence. Keith Chen and colleagues did experiments with capuchin monkeys back in 2005. They taught them to use little tokens to buy pieces of apple.
Okay.
They found the monkeys showed loss aversion too. For example, they preferred dealing with an experimenter who consistently showed and gave one piece of apple over another experimenter who initially showed two pieces, but then always visibly took one away before giving the remaining piece.
Even though the end result, one piece of apple, was identical.
Identical outcome. But the monkeys strongly avoided the experimenter associated with the loss of that second piece. It suggests this bias is really deep-seated, maybe evolved quite early on.
Monkeys hate losing apple pieces just like we hate parking tickets. That's amazing. Okay, so we know it's deep, it's potentially evolutionary, it affects monkeys. What can we actually do about it? How do we manage this bias in our own lives?
Well, the first step, honestly, is just awareness. Simply knowing that loss aversion exists and that it pulls on your decisions is incredibly powerful.
Recognizing that gut feeling for what it is may be an overreaction.
Exactly. When you feel that disproportionate sting or fear related to a potential loss, pause and ask yourself, okay, is this my loss aversion talking? That recognition is key.
So awareness first. Then what? You mentioned reframing earlier.
Yes, reframing is crucial. Try to consciously shift your perspective. A really useful tool is the "would I buy it now" test.
How does that work?
If you're agonizing over getting rid of something clutter in the closet, maybe that's stock that's gone down. Ask yourself honestly, if I didn't already own this, would I actively go out and buy it today at its current state or value?
Ooh, that's a tough question. If the answer is no,
then it's probably loss aversion or maybe the endowment effect that's making you hold on. It helps detach you from the feeling of ownership and assess its actual current value to you.
okay, that's a practical one. Applies to selling things too, I guess.
Definitely. When you're setting a price to sell something, flip it around. Would you pay that price for it if you were the buyer? If not, your asking price might be inflated by your own aversion to losing the item for less.
And for investments.
Same principle. Look at your portfolio. Is there anything in there that if you had the cash equivalent today, you wouldn't choose to buy at its current price? If the answer is yes, then loss aversion might be the only reason you're still holding it.
So it's about fighting that emotional attachment to what you have and focusing on rational current value.
Right. And related to that is trying to see the bigger picture. Our brains often isolate decisions, this one gain, this one loss.
The isolation effect.
Exactly. Try to zoom out. How does this specific decision affect your overall financial health, your overall life satisfaction in the grand scheme of things? Often, what feels like a major loss in isolation is actually just a small fluctuation when you look at the total picture. Think final outcomes, not just the immediate pang of gain or loss.
It's a good reminder. Don't sweat the small stuff, basically, even when it feels big emotionally.
Pretty much.
Okay, so wrapping this up, we've seen that loss aversion isn't just some minor quirk. It seems pretty fundamental, baked into our brains, probably for ancient survival reasons.
Influencing everything from, pizza toppings and stock portfolios to potentially even political decisions and conflicts. That pain of losing really does hit differently and harder than the pleasure of winning.
And the key takeaway seems to be that understanding this bias gives you power. Power to recognize when your gut feeling, your emotions, might be leading you astray from a more rational choice.
Exactly. It's about catching yourself when that fear of loss feels maybe out of proportion.
So the next time you feel that really strong resistance to letting something go or taking a chance because failure feels too painful, whether it's money or a job or just, changing your routine, maybe take a breath. Ask yourself, is this a rational assessment of risk, or is my ancient brain just screaming, danger, loss, a little too loud?
And could embracing what feels like a small loss actually, potentially, lead to a much bigger, better gain down the road? That's the provocative thought to ponder.
Great point. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of loss aversion. We hope this gives you some useful food for thought.
Hope so too. It's definitely something that affects us all.
Until next time, keep thinking critically and stay curious.